Colleagues, what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about today, and it sort of leads in on the earlier discussion, is the sort of first 3 years of ASQA's existence as the national regulator of training providers. Almost national. It wouldn't be Australia unless we had some joys of federation finding its way through, so we cover the national scene except for Victoria and Western Australia, but we do cover the scene if any provider has a international student on their book. So we do cover the vast majority of registered training providers in Australia, but there still are some hundreds of providers who are regulated at the Victorian and Western Australian level. So currently there are about Oops. There we go. Upside down. Well, that's a good start. So currently there are around about 4,000 training providers which ASQA regulates. About 4,800 nationally, so there's about 800 between the Victorian and the Western Australian regulator, and approaching 1,200 RTOs which ASQA regulates in New South Wales. In terms of what we've found in our first 3 years, and this is off the back now of having done about 3,000 audit activities. Now that's not 3,000 audits of individual training providers. It's a somewhat lower figure than that because in a given case, if something's through various review processes and the like, there might be multiple interactions with the one provider. But we are now getting a reasonable database in terms of what a national picture is. So of that audit activity that we've done to date, about 16.5% of people that have tried to get market entry, that is registration as a training provider, we've knocked back, that we weren't satisfied that they were going to meet the national standards. Of those who have been existing providers, and that means they've given the registration cycle is 5 years, so they've been in the marketplace for at least 5 years. We've knocked back the best part of 7% of the existing providers endeavouring to be re-registered, and that's a sobering figure. That's 113 applications for re-registration that have been refused. Only about 2% of change of scope applications have been refused, so an existing provider wanting to move into a new qualification, a new training package area. But it would be fair to say that in terms of the operation of our risk model, I mean, we've got limited resources like any regulator, and you've got to make judgments as to where you're going to best apply those resources. We don't necessarily put the greatest priority on all change of scope applications. We try to target where we put our energies there. So just over 2% of change of scope applications have been reviewed. But mind you, the vast bulk of the applications that ASQA deals with are in that form. So that's 2% of something like about 12 or 13,000 applications. So it's still a reasonable number. So of those audit activities that we've done at the moment, sort of building on what was the traditional state model as a regulator, which is very much in the RTO space as a permission-based regulator. By that I mean the regulator sits there and waits for someone to come knocking at our door and ask for a yes or no answer. Will you allow us to enter the market and put out our shingle as an RTO, yes or no? Will you re-register us, yes or no? Will you approve this addition to the scope of the qualifications or the courses that we're able to offer, yes or no. So it's a rather passive form of regulation, which was the prevailing state model when ASQA commenced, and of course has described largely at least the first 2 or so years of ASQA's operation as we've been building our own approach. So of those 3,000 odd engagements we've had with training providers through various audit activities, only about 10% have been triggered other than through responses to applications, responses for a request for a permission. Now, of those other 10% of work that we've done, and that's largely work which has been triggered by complaints work. We've had concerns put to us from a whole variety of sources, complaints from students, complaints from state regulators, complaints from the Department of Immigration, for instance, and concerns about things going on with international students. So a whole range of sources have led to about 10% of the audit engagement we've done. And as a result of that, we've taken decisions to either cancel completely, cancel the registration, or to suspend, at least in part of the operation of another 130 RTOs. So again, this is against a backdrop of ASQA dealing with about a bit under now 4,000 total providers. So it's starting to just paint a couple of the broad strokes, which I'll talk about in terms of the way in which ASQA is evolving in terms of its approach. So we started very much as a permission-based regulator responding to requests through the forms of applications. We are increasingly moving to an intelligence and data-led regulator, where we endeavour to determine where our regulatory resources can best be applied to have maximum impact to problems that we identify in the way in which the training market and training providers are operating. Now, from those engagements, so that those deeper engagements we've had with providers in the training market, the real broad sort of findings so far over the first 3 years, that we've found 20% of providers have been given a complete clean bill of health on first examination. So we do an audit, all of the standards that are examined, compliance with the relevant training package, 20% absolutely spot clean. 80%, obviously the vast majority at first examination, have had at least one non-compliance, either with one of the national standards or some failure flowing from the requirements of the national standards to meeting the specific requirements of a training package. Now, all providers are given 20 days after they get their audit report to provide rectification evidence, and there could be quite a spread there. Someone could be saying, look, your auditor got it wrong. They misunderstood the information and what we've told them till, okay, that was wrong, but we're able, within a pretty short period of time, to overcome the problem and provide evidence to you that we can operate in a fully compliant way. So after that 20-day period, effectively the proportions reverse. So after that 20-day period, 80% of the providers that we've dealt with are able to establish that they can operate consistently with the national standards and the requirements of the specific training packages that they're licensed to deliver. And something like just a bit over 23%, or just over 20%, the 23% have still some level of non-compliance after that 20-day period. So where those decisions in terms of cancellations and suspensions and the like that I mentioned earlier, that's obviously flowing out of that 23% figure. Now, that's the broad figures. Let's have a look at the RTOs that are operating in your sector, who have these training packages that your Skills Council is responsible for on their books. So they're the 4 training packages that I've taken the figures out. There are, in terms of ASQA regulated providers, 133 ASQA regulated providers that have one or more of the training packages on their books that they're licensed to deliver. That's the spread across the states. So Queensland's the single largest. Interestingly enough, Queensland has the largest number of training providers in the country, and I suppose it reflects the diversified nature of Queensland, with more people living outside of the state capital than that live in it, and that's the only state that has that, so you're not that surprised that you have a greater diversity and greater number of training providers in Queensland. Obviously, Victoria and New South Wales are the next largest states in terms of the numbers. So 133 nationally. Now, remember that had that basic 80-20 figure in terms of all training providers, so the entire Australian training provider community. For the providers in your sector, it's more like 70-30. So we've found a slightly higher level of initial compliance rates with providers in this industry. So 30% have been fully compliant at first review, so a bit higher. And then after the rectification period, that 20-day period to either show that we got it wrong when we were auditing or to fix things that could be fixed reasonably quickly, you're getting close to a bit under 90%, a bit over 10% still have a non-compliance after that period. So they're not wildly different from the entire Australia-wide picture of training providers, but a slightly stronger performance in training providers in your particular industry sector. So let's now have a look at breaking that down into the individual standards. So where are we finding these problems? Where are the standards that we're finding these problems? So these are the providers in your sector. Then I'll compare this against the overall picture for Australia. But this first slide, and it's probably a bit small to see down the back, but where we're finding problems consistently, and this is follows on some of the statements in Neil's presentation, is in the quality training and assessment. That's the core standard, obviously. That is the core standard in terms of Australia achieving a skilled workforce, is that we are getting good quality training and it is being properly assessed. And that is where we're finding the greatest level of non-compliance at first sweep. So for your sector, only 28% of those 133 providers that we've had a look at were complete tick at the first sweep, following the rectification period that went up to 87%. So after the 20-day period, people were able to get up to 87%. If I then show that same slide now, and this is for the entire Australian marketplace, broadly similar, but slightly, your sector is doing slightly better in terms of that core standard, the SNR number 15, dealing with training and assessment, and more or less similar patterns. Obviously, a little variation between each sector is a bit different in the performance, but it's a similar sort of picture Let's break down the training quality and training assessment standard itself. Let's look at the individual components there and where we're finding particular problems. So this again is providers with your training packages on their scope. So the first standard there, pretty good results. That's providing evidence of continuous improvement of training and assessment. Pretty reasonable results there. The one with the worst results first up is 15.5, and that's the standard requiring that assessment be done properly. So maybe that's not terribly surprising to you, Neil, given your experiences in Victoria, that we are finding the same experience about assessment is not done terribly well in this country. That's a statement I think I can now make after 3 years of operation of the data that we've gathered. We're going to have to, as a nation, do better in the area of doing assessment well, of being comfortable that we are actually delivering the competencies that the piece of paper say have actually been delivered. If I look at the same figure for all of so this is the second slide, which is the totality of the training providers, so all of them across all of the sectors, similar results, but unlike the general one I was just making, that this sector does a little bit better than on the whole, it's actually doing a little bit worse in the assessment first up view than the the totality of training providers across the country. Similar picture, just slightly worse than the overall picture for the entire training market. So, what do we draw from all that work? Firstly, we seem to have about 20% of providers who we have some reasonable degree of confidence are operating at a good, high, consistently high standard. We go in there, we look at them, clean bill of health, at least in terms of what we're doing. And I suppose I should say, I mean, the system that we do operate in Australia, and it's interesting in terms of the contrast of the state regulator here, we do tend to operate what I call a cake mix system rather than a cake test system. And so the cake mix system is that you look at the invariance ingredients, inputs into the achievement of competency, and the argument being, well, if you've got these inputs and they're being delivered properly and you're assessing them, then at the end of the day you should have a reasonable cake. Put good ingredients in, have a proper mix master, put it all together, you should have a reasonable cake. The cake taste system is what Neil's operating. He's actually biting into the thing and seeing, well, is it actually what it looks to be? Does it actually taste as it should? So we're finding, based on the model that we operate under, which is largely the Australian model, that 20% look like they're putting together a very good quality cake straight up. There seems then to be another category of providers, we put it at about 60%, who we think, well, look, there is some degree of shortfall here. It's able to be addressed pretty quickly once a bit of a microscope's put on them. And there's a whole variety of reasons as to, with that grouping, why that might be the case. We don't always have the clearest set of standards in place in terms of actually what are we actually requiring people to meet. Do people getting decent information flows in terms of what they're trying to do? So we assume that the vast majority in that group want to do the right thing, and with a bit of help and support and clarity of what the right thing means, can probably move themselves up to be more of them in that 20% category. So that's obviously a public policy objective. And we've got 20% who either got to get their act together and get it up together much better, or to get out. And our job is to get one or two of those achievements, get them operating at a higher level quickly, or to get them out of the marketplace. We're going to be a much better country if we have, the whole bar being lifted in terms of the quality that we need to be dealing with. Same point I think I've been made there. The last point there, that this transaction-based regulatory approach, which was the state-based model, which we from day one opened our doors and was sort of like a state-based regulator, only larger, but as we've evolved our way through, the transaction-based regulatory approach is going to be too slow a way to get and drive an improvement of quality of providers. Simply waiting for someone's 5-year cycle to sort of tick over and to walk into the door is not the way to be effective. That could be a safety net. You don't want someone out there forever and no one ever looking at them, so it's a safety net to have a end-of-life registration period, but there is, that we need data and intelligence. We need to be able to analyse that, to understand the trends, to have then the power and the people to be able to react to it. And really the story of ASQA is about building those components in terms of our way forward. We're going through, and we've commented earlier, and the Minister's speech yesterday was another instalment of it, of a major period of change, reform in the vet sector. ASQA's, we get consulted and play a bit of a part in that, and one thing we're certainly playing a part in is the way the new standards, the national standards, have been developed. We've fed in our experiences of where we've found problems with the standards, where there seem to be issues and people understanding what the requirements are. So we've, as I say, that group of people that we think want to do the right thing, but I'd sort of say, tell us what it is and we'll do it. So getting clarity and support for that group. And other areas where the standards simply don't give us, as the regulator, in our view, the tools to act as effectively as we would like. And certainly some of the things around the length of courses, the volume and quantity of learning issues is where there's often been a fair bit of debate in Australia as to how important those requirements will be. At the end of the day, as a regulator, we don't write these standards. We're given to them and we're to regulate against them, but we have a view and we're inputting those views to government. We certainly do have a responsibility to make sure that we operate as effectively as we can and engage to try to lift overall performance of providers. And we're doing that through a range of measures, particularly, if I say, talking about that 60% group that's seen to probably can get there if we work with them to get that closer up to that clean bill of health at first instance. The new national standards we expect will come into effect from the 1st of January. There's been a long process of gestation in getting these things done. We expect that the anticipation is that the ministerial Council will sign off on them, or the plan is by the end of this month, so that they'll be in their final form able to be released from October. And we're hoping that timetable, that the government will be able to make that timetable, because starting in November we will be commencing a national series of workshops targeting all of the training provider community, and here's our list of them, some 28 workshops with our lead auditors to work with the compliance and leadership groups of the training providers around Australia to understand where the new standards have changed and what requirements are. So this will be a very major effort on our behalf to disseminate and to build a first starting point of understanding of what the new requirements will be. And we're obviously will regulate against these new standards in a sensible way. We can't expect people where things are changing significantly to necessarily just overnight have responded. So we'll expect everyone to be compliant from the day the new standards apply, but we'll obviously handle that in a sensible way. And just our contact details. Now, the dangers of being last speaker before lunch is that I've actually eaten into our lunch break, but I will happily take any questions if we do. And we seem to have a few. Well, there we go. Yeah.
Thank you. Ray Dingley, Department of Industry. Just a question about the 20% who either need to lift their game or get out of the industry. Have you identified any one, whether it's a trade or non-trade weighting, or a specific industry sector weighting?
No, look, it really has been
across the board? Yeah.
Look, it has been quite interesting how broad-based that figure has been. For instance, last year we completed our first 3 strategic reviews, where we picked the industry of aged care, the training packages in aged care and providers in that space. You know, we're finding the same sort of broad-based in aged care, and we're currently doing one in childcare, which is one of our current strategic reviews. And while it's, you know, we're still working our way through the figures and completing the program of spot audits and the like, we're finding, you know, much the same sort of pattern. It's not, you know, I put up the slides for this sector, and you know, you'll get 5 or 7% variation, but it's not broadly different. That does seem to be, you know, it's interesting, quite consistent across the sector, across all of the sectors.
Thanks, Michael. My name's Col Harris, Electrical Trades Union. Your presentation was interesting. You know, quality of training and assessment as being the major problems. I agree with you. The improvement in the quality of training and assessment post rectification, fine. But that presupposes one thing, that there is proper auditing taking place. Now, my organisation's experience to date has been that that's far from what's happening. An example is that in fact, we made 3 complaints about one large publicly owned RTO in New South Wales about the quality of training and assessment they were delivering. Subsequently, that RTO was audited and was given a clean bill of health. We appealed again. We wrote again to your organisation. As far as we know, nothing happened. As a result of that, some of the people that were undergoing training were subsequently issued with a C3 electrotechnology electrician qualification. We don't know whether they applied to state training services for the issue of a licence. We believe they didn't because, lo and behold, the very people we were complaining about turned up in Queensland and applied to the Queensland regulator for a licence. Subsequently, the Queensland regulator has written to ASCA complaining about the large publicly owned RTO in New South Wales that issued that C3. So your presentation, as far as it goes, is good, but to date, we have found the auditing process to be appalling. And I've got to say that the electrotechnology industry is an at-risk trade. When a sector of industry comes up with a specific complaint about the quality of training and assessment, this is about life and limb. It's about public and workplace safety. Your auditors should respond properly, and whether your organisation has the in-house expertise to do proper, thorough audits, like organisations like EOS have indicated, they will provide subject experts to advise the auditors. Something has to be done, otherwise this is going to be sorted out by a coroner. Yeah,
look, it's difficult for me in terms of to start talking about individual cases and like. So I have to talk in the broad. I accept that the issue of consistency and overall quality of the auditing that we do has been an issue for us because we picked up, effectively 8 disparate state-based approaches. So we opened our door and we were a merger of, 6, because 2 didn't come across, different entities. We had all of the sort of variations in a theme and approach and the like, and all the differential of excellent to not so flash in terms of what we've started with. We started with very much a permissions-based system that I've described, and very underdone in terms of the capacity to properly respond to complaints and intelligence. And that's simply the truth of it. I'm not going to gild the lily about it. We have had to, in effect, sort of fly the plane while building it. What I'd like to think is that we are now much better than we were, and we still have a way to go. In terms of sort of the individual case and thing, come and grab me at lunch and talk to me about those particular ones, and I'll take a note of it and come back to you and the like. In terms of the, not simply the horizon, really, the close history now, we have, much better levels of data and intelligence now than obviously we started somewhat with a blank sheet of paper in terms of that. We are putting much more, shifting the focus away from simply the permission-based application into the response to what industry or employers or students or unions are telling us where problems might be. I can't guarantee that every person who goes out wearing an ASQA hat is some sort of absolute gun person, but I do accept the general point that all of the pieces of the machine need to work. Otherwise, we get a less than perfect outcome, and we're still improving. We're still improving. Yeah.
Yeah, Michael. Originally, when ASQA was set up, they actually addressed the National Occupational Licensing advisory panels about arrangements with MOUs, particularly to try and help with industry assessment models that were in the process. There was MOUs entered into with the regulators, that's Neil's group of ERAC, and also EOS, for us to help your auditors assess, particularly the assessment instruments, because we saw that as the key, and based on Neil's evidence, the assessment process is really the key to us. When we get an electrician, they actually are an electrician. Yeah. One of my colleagues said to me one day, you can have a really good process for concrete life jackets. So for us, it's the assessment process that we offer, and we've offered your auditors free of charge to go and assist in that assessment process. At this point in time, I think we've done one. I don't think the regulators who offer the same assistance have done any. Because of the nature of our industry, we would like to work with ASQA on this point, and we're not in it for monetary gain, we're in it for making quality outcomes a benefit to our industry, productivity and safety, etc., etc. So I'd make that offer, and those MOUs are in existence now, and we would like to be utilised. Whether that's seen as another piece of red tape, that's an issue for other people. But for us, it's an important aspect that we get the assessment right. We don't want to take away the innovative role of the RTO. All we want to do is make sure we get what we say we get when the qualification's handed out. And I'll make that offer from EOS, particularly. The regulators got the same MOU in place, and I don't think we have discussions, obviously, and we haven't been utilised.
Yeah, look, can I make a couple of comments? Firstly, I welcome the offer and the like. We regulate the entire Australian economy in terms of sort of, particular specialist knowledge, if I can put it that way. And our audit process, we don't pretend to have anything like the knowledge that you would have nor do we pretend that we have it in hairdressing or bricklaying or, you know, you pick your field. The nature of the audit process is, what is the training package saying is required? What are the stipulations that are required in the training package? Because we say, well, that's what industry has determined is required for someone to walk out of here with the competencies that they need and that the piece of paper says they have. Okay, so that's a core starting point requirement. There is then the national standards, which are generic across all of the industry types, and they go to sort of things like, what do you need to have as evidence? What are the rules of evidence? What are the basics, qualifications and the like that your trainers and your assessors should be? And we are assessing against those two core ingredients. Now, if there's deficiency in terms of the training package, in terms of it's not there, then that leaves us in a difficulty. But really, the audit process is not a testing. We're not doing Neil's job of actually sitting there, say, show us you can change the circuits here or whatever the particular requirements are. We're saying, show us evidence that you've met the requirements of the training package. Show us the evidence of the assessments that you have undertaken. We may, in a sampling things, try to talk to a number of the students that have gone through it. Tell us what your experiences have been, but we're not testing the students. Now, there's been good debates in this country, and I think they should continue, as to whether there is fundamentally a better model, and that should be a national testing models. There's been all sorts of arguments, and through, Martin would have gone through this 100 times in terms of what these things are. But, we're given a role to play, and we'll play it. And I think there can be sometimes a bit of a misconception of that. You can't do your job, if you're checking a hairdresser, and you've got a hairdresser next to you doing the work. And that would be true if you were, saying, well, here's a person in front of them, give them a blow wave and what have you, and let me see what you're doing. But that isn't, as I say, we have a cake mix model, not a cake taste model. And it's a different approach. Now, I'm not saying it's the best approach. I'm just telling you, that's what we're charged to do. That's what government says, ASQA, take this, implement this tool, take this training package, boom, go test and do your work against that. So I'm very happy through the flows of information. I think the MOUs are vital for us, particularly in telling us where to go. We don't have crystal balls. You have to, we've got to hear from sources where the problems are. And I do take the point, once we hear that, you've got to follow through and get an outcome. But you've got to do both. And it's obviously a vital part of it. But we do utilise industry experts in a range of circumstances. But I've got to be honest, it's not the standard model. We don't sort of do everything against having someone from your group or someone from the construction ISC or what have you next to us when we're doing it. But I appreciate the goodwill and the desire to help us do our job as best we can.
The concern for us is obviously, if you look at Neil's...
Yeah, I know. Well, Neil's figures are bloody really sobering, aren't they?
So
yeah.
What we're saying is if, for example, an assessment instrument on forklift impedance,
Yeah.
you really know, if somebody could show you your auditor
Yeah.
an assessment event on
Yeah.
forklift impedance that would, unless they would, as an industry person,
Yes.
forklift impedance was
Yeah.
the basic safety things
Yeah.
of our industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
They could show them anything,
Yeah.
unless you knew
Yeah.
that forklift impedance assessment event
Yeah.
was correct,
Yeah.
you could be hoodwinked
Yes.
by the dodgy RTO
Sure.
into saying, this is the assessment model, and they go, well, at the end of it, tick.
Yeah.
Now,
Well, I think
that's the type
I understand what you're saying, and I think you might find that when the new standards come out, there's a bit to be said in terms of that, and the role within RTOs in terms of their engagement with industry and the endorsement of their assessment techniques. Again, if the standards are, saying, well, this is what the community expressed through government expects us to do, we'll regulate against them. We can't just make it up ourselves. We have to comply against those standards. So I think there is some movement along those lines, which, I don't know whether it's going to completely cover the point that you're making, but I think it'll go some of the way there.
Look, I understand your...
Yeah.
It's like a herd of cats. And at the end of the day, we're saying we want to help as much as we can.
Yeah, sure.
And that's the whole idea of today, is how we
can
work
help.
together.
Yep, and nothing but desire on our behalf to do that as well.
Listen, we've got one more question, and then we're going to have to go to lunch. Thanks.
All right, Alan Hicks from the ETU. Thanks for your presentation. Just quickly, and I appreciate you may have to take this on notice. I've got two questions. First one is I'd be interested in funding arrangements for your organisation, not only now but obviously in the future, and if there's been any cuts through the budget and that sort of stuff proposed. And the second part of the question is, and this is the one that you may have to take on notice, I'd be interested in the number of inspectors that you have in the compliance team, and of those numbers of inspectors, particularly for our industry of the 133 RTOs that provide the services, how many would have the technical skills and expertise to actually go out and do that? So, like, I appreciate may have to take that on notice, but if you can provide that information, particularly back through EOS, I think it'd be an important aspect of today's assessment.
Yeah, I think we might be at cross purposes in terms of the expertise. In terms of, as I say, how many do we have? We've got on our books around about 70 in our compliance team, and then we supplement that through external, what we call panel auditors. So that's another group of people who have gone through a tender and appointment process with us. Now, they're actual auditors. Then there's another team in ASCA which are involved in what we call investigations, which might lead to actual criminal prosecutions or the setting of civil penalties, and there's another group there as well. But I think you'd be saying, well, the people who go out and look at the 133 and doing the audits, we've got about 70 in that group around Australia. How many of them would have, like an electrical background or qualifications? I couldn't tell you, but very few. Just as if someone asked me, well, you got a background in construction and crane gantries or something, again, it'd be very few, if any, And given what we are covering the entire Australian economy and 12 skills councils representing groupings within that economy, you wouldn't expect it otherwise to be the case. In terms of your first question about budget, we took our the so-called efficiency dividend haircut along with the rest of the Commonwealth government in the last budget. But in fairness to the government, in the part of their vet reform packaging, they are actually providing over and above the May budget a bit more resource to us, particularly around the rollout of these new standards and the like. So there are a few other regulators sitting around who have taken a bit of a beating. We're not one of them.